Grow Your Mindset podcast. Grow your mind, change your life.
So I want you to imagine, like, spending the last 20 years of your life just rotting in a freezing, totally solitary prison cell.
Right, high up in the Pyrenees Mountains. Just brutal.
Yeah, exactly. Your name is erased. Your freedom is completely gone. I mean, your future is just a blank stone wall. And the craziest part, your only crime, the only reason you were sitting in the dark is that you threw a party that was just a little too good.
It sounds insane when you put it like that, but yeah, it's true.
Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. Today, we are looking at the invisible and honestly often terrifying laws of human power, and really how just a single miscalculation can cost you everything.
It is a pretty brutal historical reality,
Yeah,
because we naturally want to believe that human behavior is, well, logical.
right.
We want it to be like medicine or engineering where, you identify a broken bone on an X-ray, you apply a cast, and boom, the problem is solved.
Right, it's linear.
Exactly. But when you step into the realm of influence or hierarchy or ambition, that X-ray machine just completely shatters.
Yeah.
We are operating in the shadows here.
Which perfectly brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. We are plunging into a massive, incredibly tactical body of work. We're doing a comprehensive analysis of a really famous book, Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power.
Oh, yeah. The controversial one.
Yeah, and I know that just mentioning that title probably sets off alarm bells for some of you listening right now. It has this deeply entrenched reputation.
It really does. It is routinely dismissed by its critics as basically a manual for sociopaths, like a playbook for aspiring Machiavellian villains who just want to ruthlessly climb the corporate ladder.
Right, the whole Gordon Gekko greed is good vibe.
Exactly. But to view the material strictly through that cynical lens is honestly to miss the fundamental reality of human dynamics. Power isn't inherently evil. Power is simply gravity.
It's just a force.
Right. It's the invisible force that dictates how human beings interact the moment they need something from one another.
And I really want to stress this. Our goal for you today is absolutely not to teach you how to become a tyrant in your office or like a monster in your social circle. The goal here is to help you decipher human behavior. Because if you do not understand the language of power, you are virtually guaranteed to be manipulated by the people who do.
That is the crux of it right there. Ignorance is not a shield in these environments.
Yeah.
It's actually a massive vulnerability.
You can't defend against a weapon you refuse to look at, right? So we have mapped out a very specific journey for you today. We're sequencing these concepts to mirror the actual trajectory of a career, or honestly just a life. We are breaking this into 3 distinct phases.
Sounds like a solid plan.
Yeah, so phase 1 is the ascent, how you actually gain traction and power when you were starting from the very bottom of the hierarchy. And then phase 2 explores the stronghold, basically the counterintuitive rules for maintaining and consolidating your position once you actually reach the top.
Right. And then we reach phase 3, which is where this material becomes truly vital, I think. We will kind of flip the board and show you how to recognize these exact laws when they're being deployed against you.
Yes, the defense.
Exactly. This is really about building an impenetrable shield against manipulation.
So let's get right into the ascent. Because logically, you can't protect yourself from the dynamics of power if you haven't even entered the arena yet.
Yeah.
When you were just starting out, the absolute mandate is that you have to stand out. You have to prove your worth.
But there is a massive, incredibly dangerous catch to that.
Right.
You have to do it without triggering the deeply rooted insecurities of the people above you.
Yeah.
And that is arguably like the most delicate tightrope walk in any professional or social structure.
Which brings us straight back to the man in the freezing mountain prison.
Yes. This is Law 1. Never outshine the master. And the historical anchor here is Nicolas Fouquet in 17th century France. He was the finance minister for King Louis XIV.
A man who clearly did not understand the tightrope he was walking.
Oh, he missed it entirely. Fouquet was brilliant. He was fiercely ambitious, and he had this well-known appetite for just the absolute finest things in life.
Right.
So when the Prime Minister of France passed away, Fouquet saw a vacuum. He wanted that top spot. But instead of playing the political game with, subtle maneuvering, he made this catastrophic miscalculation. He decided to showcase his undeniable value by throwing a party.
But calling it a party almost undersells it, right? This wasn't just some dinner.
No, it was an epoch-defining spectacle. He hosted it at his newly finished, breathtakingly opulent chateau, Vaux-le-Vicomte. We're talking about the most extravagant, mind-bogglingly lavish event France had ever witnessed.
Wow.
Like, the food was brought in from across the globe, totally new theatrical works were commissioned specifically for the evening, massive fireworks displays lit up the sky. He invited the king, fully intending to show Louis XIV just how powerful, well-connected, and resourceful his finance minister was.
And, I mean, the logic makes total sense on a surface level, doesn't it? He thought he was giving a presentation on his own competence. He was basically saying, look at the magnificent things I can orchestrate. Just imagine what I can do for your kingdom.
Yeah, that was his thought process. But he completely failed to account for the ego of his audience. King Louis XIV did not look at the magnificent fireworks and feel grateful. He looked around and felt overshadowed.
Oh, man.
Yeah, he felt that his own brilliance, his own royal authority, was being diminished by a subordinate who was living better than the king himself.
And the fallout was pretty much immediate, right?
The very next day, Fouquet was arrested. He was accused of embezzling state funds.
Right. Were the charges actually legitimate?
Historically, it is highly debatable. Most historians agree it was largely a fabricated pretense. But the truth didn't even matter. The king's ego had sustained a critical injury. So Fouquet was stripped of absolutely everything and sentenced to life in solitary confinement.
That is just a terrifying escalation. And while, obviously we aren't throwing banquets for 17th century monarchs today, the underlying psychology maps perfectly onto the modern professional world.
Oh, 100%.
Think about like a high-stakes pitch meeting. You're a junior associate, right? And you are sitting in the room with your direct manager and the CEO of the company.
Sweating a little bit, yeah.
Exactly. And the CEO asks this really complex question. Your manager hesitates. And you, eager to show your brilliance, you just jump right in. You answer the question flawlessly. You lay out this brilliant strategy, and the CEO is incredibly impressed. Objectively, you did a great job for the company.
But subjectively.
Right. Subjectively, in doing so, you just made your direct manager look completely incompetent in front of their boss. You stole the spotlight, and that manager is now going to spend the next 6 months finding a reason to fire you.
That mechanism is absolutely identical to Fouquet's mistake. Because power, especially in like middle management or precarious leadership positions, is incredibly fragile. A leader's authority often rests on this unspoken illusion that they are the most capable, visionary person in the room.
Yeah.
When you threaten that illusion, even accidentally, purely through your own natural competence, you trigger a primal, deeply irrational survival response in them. They no longer see you as an asset, They see you as a predator.
Wait, hold on, though. If that is the reality, how do we ever advance? Are we supposed to just, dim our own lights, pretend to be mediocre, and hide our talents forever? Because that sounds like a recipe for a completely stagnant, miserable life.
It's a really natural question, and honestly, the source material provides a brilliant historical counter-strategy for this. The goal isn't to hide your brilliance, it's to channel the credit for your brilliance upward.
Okay, how does that work?
Look at Galileo in the early 1600s. I mean, he was arguably the greatest scientific mind of his generation, but he had a very grounded, practical problem. He needed funding. He desperately needed wealthy, powerful patrons to bankroll his continued research.
Right, because telescopes and research time aren't free.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when Galileo made his massive world-altering discovery of the moons of Jupiter, he possessed information that basically proved his own genius. But he didn't just publish the findings and shout about his own brilliance in the town square. He understood the fragile egos of the powerful.
Interesting. So what did he do?
He strategically dedicated the discovery to the Medici family. Now, the crucial detail here is that the Medici family's royal mythological symbol happened to be Jupiter.
Oh, wow. That is a masterstroke of positioning.
Right. He took a purely scientific reality and wrapped it in a narrative tailored entirely to their ego. He didn't just give them a cool astronomy fact. He presented the discovery of Jupiter's moons as this cosmic, divinely ordained proof of the Medici family's right to rule.
That's brilliant.
He made his masters feel like absolute world historical geniuses. He made them feel chosen by the heavens. And in return, they made him their official court mathematician and philosopher, basically guaranteeing him a lifetime of financial and political stability.
So he used his undeniable talent, but he consciously designed the outcome to act as, a mirror that reflected the glory back onto his superior.
Exactly.
So the takeaway for the listener today is to, ask for your boss's advice, pitch an idea, but maybe leave a small, obvious gap so the boss can fix it, and claim partial ownership of the victory. Make them feel like your success is merely a byproduct of their excellent leadership.
That is the exact translation for today. But, there is an addendum to this law. You asked when we should break it.
Yeah, is there a time to just shine?
Yes. If your superior is a fading star, if they're undeniably weak, losing favor with their own superiors, and their foundation is visibly crumbling, then the dynamic shifts entirely. You no longer need to protect their ego. You can subtly begin to step out of the shadows and position yourself as the natural, competent successor. But you only do that when their ship is already sinking. Got it. Don't go down with the ship. So, okay, you've learned to soothe the boss's ego. You are safe. But safety doesn't get you promoted, right? Safety just keeps you employed. How do you actually get noticed without painting a target on your back? This brings us to a massive pivot in the ascent. Law 6, court attention at all cost.
Yes. This law deals with the brutal reality of perception. And to understand it, we look at probably the ultimate historical rivalry regarding innovation and public image. Nikola Tesla versus Thomas Edison.
Oh man, let's break this down because Tesla has essentially become a modern folk hero for in the misunderstood genius.
And rightfully so. From a purely scientific standpoint, Tesla was, by almost all objective measures, the more visionary and brilliant inventor. His foundational understanding of alternating current literally shaped the power grid of the modern world.
Yeah.
But Tesla harbored this fatal, incredibly common professional flaw. He believed that the work would speak for itself. He thought that if he just locked himself in his lab and produced undeniable genius, the world would naturally recognize and reward it.
Which is exactly the lie we were all told growing up. Put your head down, do good work, be a team player, and the rewards will naturally follow.
It is a noble lie, but in the game of power, it's disastrous. Thomas Edison operated on a completely different frequency. Edison understood that invention was really only half the battle. The other half was theater.
Theater, I love that word for it.
Yeah, Edison wasn't just an engineer. He was a ruthless master of PR and showmanship. He didn't just invent things. He staged highly publicized electrifying demonstrations. He constantly invited the press to his laboratory.
Yep.
He made incredibly bold, sensational claims about future technologies. He was predicting things like thinking machines and automated robots long before he had any capability to build them.
He was selling the sizzle while Tesla was agonizing over the steak in total isolation.
Exactly. Edison understood human psychology. The human brain has a finite bandwidth for attention. If you are not actively capturing it, someone else is. In 1915, there were heavy rumors that the Nobel Prize Committee was going to award the prize jointly to both Edison and Tesla.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and Edison actually moved to reject the offer.
Wait, really? He turned down a Nobel Prize?
Well, he tried to, because accepting a joint award would have forced him to share the spotlight and validate Tesla as an equal. To Edison, attention was a zero-sum game. You hoard it, you control it, and you never, ever dilute it.
That is ruthless. And the historical outcome is pretty grim, right?
Very grim. Tesla died largely penniless, literally feeding pigeons in a New York hotel, while Edison became an immortal, incredibly wealthy titan of industry.
Because perception beats reality. The source material outlines some very aggressive tactics here. It argues you have to attach your name to the sensational. You have to constantly reinvent your image so people don't grow accustomed to you and get bored.
Right.
You have to create an aura of mystery. And most provocatively, it argues that being attacked and criticized is exponentially better than being ignored.
Oh yeah, that one always gets people.
Right. I can almost hear the audience wincing at that last point. Because we are biologically wired to fear criticism. We want to be liked. We want to blend in with the herd because, evolutionarily speaking, the animal that stands out from the herd is the one that gets eaten. Yeah.
It is deeply counterinstinctual.
Right.
But the logic is incredibly sound within this framework.
Okay.
Because if you blend in, you are powerless. You basically become part of the background wallpaper. But if people are criticizing you, attacking your ideas, debating your methods, it means they are focused on you. They are spending their finite cognitive energy on your existence. And attention, whether it's positive or negative, is the raw currency of influence. You simply cannot leverage people who don't know you exist.
Okay, so you have navigated the fragile egos above you. You have captured the spotlight. People know who you are. But to continue ascending, you inevitably need things from other people, right? You need funding, you need a promotion, you need a critical introduction. And that brings us to Law 13. Appeal to people's self-interest, never to their mercy.
This is where we confront the stark reality of human motivation. To really illustrate this, the text points to Christopher Columbus in the late 15th century.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Well, Columbus had this massive, historically audacious dream to find a western sea route to Asia. But to execute it, he needed an astronomical amount of money, ships, and men. So for years, he basically dragged his pitch from royal court to royal court across Europe.
And he was getting the door slammed in his face repeatedly.
Oh, constantly. Because of how he was pitching it. He was approaching these monarchs and talking about the grand romance of exploration. He was talking about the spirit of discovery, the intellectual triumph of mapping the unknown. He was pitching what mattered to him, and the monarchs looked at his charts, calculated the enormous financial risk, and just dismissed him.
He was basically asking them to fund his hobby.
Exactly. He was relying on their appreciation for his vision. But then he profoundly shifted his strategy when he finally gained an audience with Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain. He completely dropped all the romantic rhetoric about discovery.
So what did he say?
He looked at their political situation. Spain was desperately trying to compete with Portugal for global dominance at the time, and he appealed directly to their raw ambition and their greed.
Right.
He promised them that this new, theoretical route would yield unimaginable wealth, unlimited gold, access to exotic spices, and the massive expansion of the Spanish Empire. He promised them a competitive edge that would permanently crush their European rivals. He mapped his personal desire for exploration perfectly over their desperate, self-interested need for economic and political supremacy.
Wow. He finally showed them what was in it for them, and obviously they wrote the check. But I have to stop here and kind of push back on the underlying philosophy for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
Are we really operating under the assumption that altruism is just dead? I mean, if I do a coworker a massive favor today, you're saying I can't count on them returning that favor next month out of simple gratitude or basic human decency? That feels incredibly cynical.
It is a very common reaction to this specific law, actually. But the source material isn't arguing that kindness is a myth. People do kind things all the time. Altruism absolutely exists. The argument is about reliability in high-stakes environments. Gratitude is an incredibly fleeting emotion. It fades over time. A favor you did someone a year ago feels like ancient history to them today because they are entirely absorbed in their current problems. If you base your career strategy on the unpredictable, fleeting emotion of charity, you are basically building a house on sand.
So it is about removing friction from the transaction.
Exactly. If you want a guaranteed yes, especially from someone who holds more power than you cannot ask them to sacrifice their time out of the goodness of their heart. You must analyze their current reality, identify a problem they are desperately trying to solve, or an ego need they are trying to fulfill, and frame your request as the magical solution to their problem. Self-interest is simply a far more reliable, consistent engine than gratitude.
That reframes it perfectly. It's not that people are inherently evil, it's just that people are inherently self-focused. So, you've mastered the ascent, you've grabbed the spotlight, you've aligned your goals with the self-interest of the powerful, and you've climbed the mountain. You have arrived. You are sitting at the top of the hierarchy. But here is the terrifying realization, and I think this is where the book gets really interesting. The game isn't over.
Not at all.
The board just flips.
Yes, the rules of the game change entirely at this point. The skills that get you the promotion are fundamentally different from the skills required to keep you from getting fired.
Which marks our transition into phase 2, the stronghold. Because once you possess power, your primary directive shifts from acquisition to consolidation and defense. You now have to manage the people directly beneath you, and you have to strictly control your image.
And that brings us to what might be the most emotionally painful law in the entire text, Law 2. Never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use enemies.
Oof. It violates every platitude we are ever taught about loyalty and building a team.
It really does. But the historical evidence for the danger of friends is vast. The text focuses on the 9th century Byzantine Emperor Michael III to demonstrate this.
Okay, what happened with Michael?
So, Michael had this close companion, a man named Basil. Years earlier, Basil was a nobody. He was a lowly, stable hand. But one day, a wild horse broke loose and was moments away from basically trampling the emperor to death.
Oh, wow.
Basil, acting on pure instinct and courage, threw himself at the horse, subdued it, and saved Michael's life.
That's the ultimate bond. You literally owe this man your existence.
And Michael completely recognized that debt. He was incredibly generous. He pulled Basil out of obscurity. He showered him with wealth, gave him titles, sent him to the finest schools, and eventually elevated him to become his most trusted advisor. Eventually, he even made Basil his co-emperor.
That sounds like a beautiful story of rewarding loyalty, honestly.
It does, right up until the psychological trap of elevating a friend snaps shut.
Yeah.
Because familiarity breeds entitlement.
Yeah.
Well, when you hire a friend, the boundaries between personal affection and professional discipline become incredibly blurred. Basil stopped seeing himself as a grateful subordinate who had been saved from poverty. Because of their intimacy, Basil started feeling like an equal.
Right.
And then, as his ambition grew, he began to feel superior. He started to believe he deserved the throne entirely on his own merit. Furthermore, friends rarely challenge you openly in professional settings because they don't want to ruin the personal dynamic. So their resentments fester in secret.
So the man who saved his life.
Orchestrated his brutal assassination.
Yeah.
Yes. Basil had Michael III murdered in his bedchambers and seized the entire empire for himself. The lesson here is that a friend's betrayal is often sudden, deeply emotional, and highly unpredictable because the resentment has been hidden under the guise of loyalty.
That is a dark reality to swallow. But the second half of that law is even more counterintuitive, I think.
Right.
Learn how to use enemies. I mean, how in the world can an active rival be a safer bet than a friend?
To understand that mechanism, we look at Emperor Taizu of the Song dynasty in 10th century China. To give you some context, ruling China in the centuries prior to Taizu was essentially a death sentence. The political structure was a literal meat grinder.
How bad was it?
A powerful general would violently overthrow the reigning emperor. He would take the throne. Then, absolutely terrified that his own generals would do the exact same thing to him, he would order mass executions of his inner circle.
Jeez.
Yeah, but eventually, new generals would rise, overthrow him, and the bloody cycle would just repeat. It was a centuries-long conveyor belt of paranoia and murder.
The completely unsustainable system. So what did Taizu do differently when he seized power?
When Taizu took the throne, he was acutely aware that his rival generals were a lethal threat. He knew they were scheming. But instead of resorting to the traditional mass executions, which he knew would just drive the remaining enemies underground to plot in secret, he tried a radical psychological maneuver.
Okay.
He invited his greatest rivals, his most dangerous enemies, to a massive, lavish banquet.
Oh, man. The ultimate tense dinner party.
Incredibly tense. But during the feast, he didn't poison them. He made them an unprecedented offer. He acknowledged their power and their threat. And he promised them immense wealth, massive, beautiful estates, and a life of absolute, unbroken luxury for them and their descendants.
Wait, really?
Yes, but there was one condition. They had to voluntarily retire and surrender all of their military commands to him that very night.
He just bought them out. He gave them a golden parachute.
He bought them out, yes, but more importantly, he fundamentally managed their threat level. They agreed to the terms, they took the wealth and went home. By doing this, Taizu ended centuries of violent, bloody coups without shedding a single drop of blood, and his dynasty flourished for over 300 years.
That's amazing.
The psychological insight here is profound. Enemies are a known quantity. You know exactly where they stand. You know they want to take your spot. Because they are on guard, and because you are on guard, the relationship is entirely professional and transactional.
Right.
Furthermore, if you offer an enemy an opportunity to align with you, they will often work twice as hard as a friend to prove their loyalty because they know their past actions have placed them under intense scrutiny.
That is a fascinating paradigm shift. A well-managed enemy behaves logically, acting purely on self-interest, which makes them predictable. A trusted friend acts on complex, volatile emotions, making them dangerous.
Wow. It completely flips how you think about team building.
It really does. Okay, so you are managing your inner circle. You are keeping your friends at arm's length and structurally managing your rivals. The next step in consolidating your stronghold is managing how the broader world perceives you. And this revolves entirely around the power of scarcity.
Yes, we are looking at a synthesis of two laws here. Law 4, say less than necessary, and Law 16, use absence to increase respect and honor.
Let's start with words.
The historical masterclass in saying less is King Louis XIV of France.
We are back to the king who locked up Fouquet.
Yes, and this tactic was a huge part of how he maintained his absolute grip on the court. Louis was surrounded by scheming, brilliant advisors, nobles, and diplomats. They would constantly try to read his mind, pitch him policies, or draw him into debates.
Right.
Louis would sit perfectly still, listening to hours of passionate arguing and plotting. And at the end of the session, when everyone was holding their breath, waiting for his decree, he would look at them and simply say, "I shall see." And then he would stand up and leave the room.
Oh my God, that would be incredibly infuriating. You lay out your entire life's work and you get 3 ambiguous words.
But that ambiguity was the source of his power. Silence creates a psychological vacuum. Human beings are deeply social, anxious creatures. When we are faced with silence from an authority figure, we feel a crushing, overwhelming pressure to fill the void.
Yeah.
And when people rush to fill the silence, they start talking frantically. They start over-explaining. They inadvertently reveal their true motives, their secret anxieties, and their hidden weaknesses.
You know, I think everyone listening can immediately relate to this through a very modern, very common anxiety. Think about the dread of the typing bubble in a text message.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Right. Imagine you send a highly vulnerable, risky text. Maybe you are asking for a raise or you are sending a long apology to a partner. You hit send, you see the 3 little gray dots appear, they are typing, and then the dots disappear and nothing comes back.
Just silence.
Exactly. The silence stretches for an hour, 2 hours. That silence creates a massive, agonizing vacuum in your head. And what do? You double text.
You start negotiating against yourself.
Yes. You say, well, what I actually meant was, or we don't have to talk about it now if you're busy. You retreat and expose your insecurity purely because their digital silence forced you into a state of panic.
That is a brilliant translation of the dynamic. Louis XIV was doing the exact same thing to his court. He let their own anxiety do the work of breaking down their defenses.
So what happens when you don't do this?
Well, the text offers the tragic example of Coriolanus, the Roman military hero. On the battlefield, he was a god. He was universally respected, but when he decided to transition into politics and ran for the Senate, he completely failed to understand this law.
Well, let me guess. He talked too much.
He couldn't stop talking. He was arrogant, he was verbose, and he felt the need to loudly voice his unvarnished opinions on every single minor issue.
He oversaturated the market with his own voice.
And the more he spoke, the more ordinary he became. The public realized he wasn't a god. He was just an annoying, loud politician. He alienated so many factions through his endless talking that his reputation unraveled entirely, and the public banished him from Rome. He literally talked his way into exile.
So scarcity of words protects your authority and forces others to reveal their hands. But Law 16 takes the concept of scarcity and applies it to your physical presence, right?
Yes, using absence to increase respect. Napoleon Bonaparte understood the economics of presence deeply. In 1799, Napoleon returned to France after a massive military campaign in Egypt. He was a hero.
I mean, they must have loved him.
The public was primed to celebrate him. But instead of parading through the streets of Paris, going to every dinner party, and soaking up the adulation every single day, he made a deeply calculated move. He strategically vanished from the public eye.
Wait, he just went completely ghost.
He stayed secluded in his small home. He only saw a few close confidants. And the psychological effect on the French public was profound. If he had been out shaking hands and cutting ribbons every afternoon, people would have quickly grown accustomed to him. The excitement would have faded. He would have become ordinary.
Yeah.
But by vanishing, he created a mystery. The public imagination went wild. Rumors spread like wildfire. Where is the great general? What brilliant strategy is he planning behind closed doors?
Oh, I see. He forced the public to write his myth for him.
That is the exact mechanism. By starving the public of his presence, he inflated his own value. When he finally reemerged from his home to orchestrate his political coup, the public didn't just welcome a returning general, they welcomed a savior.
It is the fundamental law of economic supply and demand applied to human interaction. If you are always available, if you always answer the email within 30 seconds, if you attend every single optional meeting, you fade into the background wallpaper of the office. Scarcity creates value.
Always.
All right, we have one final law in phase 2 for maintaining the stronghold. Law 11, keep people dependent on you. And this introduces us to one of the most ruthless and brilliant political operators in history, Cardinal Richelieu.
Oh, Richelieu is fascinating. We are back in France, early 1600s. King Louis XIII ascends to the throne, but he is young, he is highly inexperienced, and he is surrounded by rebellious nobles and foreign threats. He is completely overwhelmed.
Under Cardinal Richelieu.
Stepping in as his chief advisor. Now, Richelieu didn't make the Fouquet mistake. He didn't try to outshine the king or steal the crown. Instead, he executed a much more insidious strategy. He quietly, systematically wove himself into the deepest fabric of every single critical operation of the state.
He essentially made himself the motherboard of the French government.
That is exactly what he did. He handled the intricate, labyrinthine foreign policy negotiations. He orchestrated the vast military logistics to crush domestic uprisings. He managed the state finances. He did all of this tirelessly, entirely in the king's name.
Okay, so he's doing all the work.
But, and this is the absolute crux of the strategy, he never taught the king how he's doing any of it. He kept the complex mechanics, the secret alliances, and the institutional knowledge entirely locked inside his own head.
Wow.
The king wore the crown, he lived in the palace, but he was utterly dependent on Richelieu's daily guidance just to keep the country from collapsing.
So bringing this out of the 17th century and into like a modern execution strategy for the listener, how does someone actually make themselves that indispensable today without getting fired for hoarding information? Because companies hate a bottleneck.
True. But the source material outlines very specific mechanics for building dependency. First, you must immerse yourself in complex, critical work that only you truly understand. You need to possess a highly specialized, painful-to-replace skill.
Okay, be uniquely valuable.
Second, you wrap yourself around the source of power. You weave yourself so deeply into the daily routines, the blind spots, and the critical workflows of your boss that removing you would cause massive, immediate disruption and pain to their daily life.
Make it hurt to lose you.
Exactly. And finally, you become the repository for specialized intelligence. You become the sole gatekeeper to key client relationships or vital legacy systems. The ultimate goal is to architect a reality where the people above you look at you and genuinely believe they cannot function or at least cannot succeed without you in the room.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground here. We have mapped the ascent, we have outlined the rules of the stronghold, but up until this very moment, we have been looking at these laws through the lens of offense. We have been looking at how to use them.
Right.
But here is the massive pivot. Here is where the floor drops out. Because the real chilling aha moment for you listening isn't just learning these historical tactics, it is the sudden, terrifying realization that these exact laws are being used against you every single day.
Every single day.
By advertisers trying to empty your wallet, by politicians trying to secure your vote, by manipulative coworkers, and by toxic friends. So the mission for Phase 3 is building the shield. How do we spot these invisible strings of manipulation, and how do we cut them?
This is where the material shifts from a playbook to a survival guide. We are moving from active manipulation to defensive situational awareness.
Let's start by identifying the traps of generosity and choice, looking specifically at Law 12 and Law 31.
Okay, so Law 12 states, use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim. And the historical anchor here is literally the oldest trick in the book. It is the defining metaphor for deception. The Trojan horse.
Yeah, everyone knows the Trojan horse.
It remains the defining metaphor because the psychological mechanism is so flawless. You know the story, the ancient Greeks besieged the city of Troy for 10 grueling years. They tried brute force, they tried starvation, and they failed utterly to breach the massive walls.
So they changed tactics.
They engage in a massive psychological operation. They pretend to surrender, they pretend to sail away, and they leave behind a massive, beautifully crafted wooden horse on the beach as an apparent gift to the gods and the Trojans.
And the Trojans, despite being at war for a decade, despite knowing the Greeks are ruthless, decide to drag this massive wooden structure inside their impenetrable walls. Why? I mean, really, why are we so easily blinded by a gift?
Because the manipulator is exploiting an evolutionary blind spot. Human beings in competitive or hostile environments naturally walk around with their guards up. We are suspicious. If a rival aggressively attacks you, your shield goes up automatically.
Wait, ready for a fight.
But a sudden, unexpected gift, an out-of-the-blue apology, or a random, highly vulnerable confession of honesty acts like an emotional circuit breaker. It short-circuits our logic. It triggers an automatic, almost involuntary response of gratitude and empathy in our brains.
Wow.
And that rush of positive emotion temporarily blinds us to any ulterior motives.
Yeah.
It forces us to willingly lower the drawbridge.
So the defense mechanism here has to be a highly trained, deeply cynical skepticism. The listener must train themselves to pause the moment they feel that rush of unexpected gratitude and ask, why is this person suddenly being so generous right now?
Exactly.
What is the broader context? If your fiercest rival at work suddenly walks over and hands you a highly visible, seemingly easy, prestigious project, you don't just smile and say thank you. You immediately look for the Greeks hiding inside the wood.
That is the necessary mindset. You must separate the emotion of the gift from the logic of the context. Now let's pair that emotional trap with a cognitive one. Law 31. Control the options, get others to play with the cards you deal. The historical master of this illusion was Ivan the Terrible in 16th century Russia.
Oh, this is one of the most audacious political maneuvers we have covered.
It is brilliant in its sheer risk.
Yeah.
So Ivan was facing severe, crippling internal rebellion from his aristocrats, the boyars. They were actively scheming against him. Now, Ivan had a powerful military. He could have just ordered his army to crush the boyars in the streets. But he knew that a bloody civil war would decimate his own forces, ruin the economy, and leave Russia incredibly vulnerable to outside invasion. So instead of brute force, he executed a massive psychological gambit. In the winter of 1564, he suddenly packed up his entire court, his wealth, and his family, and he completely abandoned the capital city of Moscow.
He disbailed.
He left behind a single letter claiming that he could no longer rule amidst an overwhelming treason and betrayal.
So he just quit. He resigned the absolute monarchy.
Quit, and the psychological impact on Moscow was instantaneous panic. The common people were terrified. They knew that without the Tsar, the ruthless aristocrats would immediately start slaughtering each other for power, plunging the entire country into bloody anarchic chaos.
Oh, wow.
So the people and the clergy chased after Ivan. They begged him on their hands and knees to return and save them from themselves. Ivan graciously agreed to return, but he presented them with a choice.
What was the choice?
He said, I will return, but only if you grant me absolute, unquestioned, tyrannical power to execute traitors without trial. You can either choose to submit entirely to my absolute rule, or I will stay in exile, and you can face the chaotic, bloody rebellion alone.
He put them on the horns of an absolute dilemma.
But the brilliance is that he made them feel like they were making a choice. The people chose to grant him absolute power. They felt relief when they made the choice, but in reality there was never a viable alternative. He entirely controlled the framework of the decision to force his desired outcome.
I love this concept because it is exactly like a magician's pick a card trick.
Yes.
Like a skilled magician fans out a deck of 52 cards in front of you. You reach your hand in, you hover over the cards, and you pull one out. In that specific moment, you feel totally 100% in control of your own free will. You chose the 7 of spades.
Right.
But the reality is that the magician used sleight of hand, body language, and pacing to force that exact card into your hand. You never had a choice. You only had the illusion of choice.
That is a flawless parallel. And that exact sleight of hand happens in boardrooms every single day.
So how do we spot it? How is the magician forcing the card on us in, like, a Tuesday morning strategy meeting?
The sources detail several highly effective tactics manipulators use to frame your choices. One of the most common is called coloring the choices. A manager or a salesman will present you with 3 distinct options, but they will consciously describe 2 of those options in such disastrous, financially ruinous, or unappealing terms that your brain naturally recoils and you choose the 3rd option. You feel like you made a strategic decision, but that 3rd option is exactly what they wanted you to pick all along.
That happens all the time.
Another tactic is the shrinking options. This leverages anxiety. A negotiator will offer you a deal, but apply intense artificial time pressure. They will tell you that the price goes up by 20% tomorrow and another 20% the next day. They are removing the option of careful deliberation. They force you to act out of sheer panic rather than logical analysis.
So they build a maze where every single path leads to their desired center. What is the defense? How do you fight a magician?
The only defense against a forced choice is a structural refusal to play the hand you were dealt. You must train yourself to step outside the presented options entirely.
Step outside the frame.
Yes. When a manipulator looks at you and says, look, we are out of time, you can either do A or B, which is it, your immediate internal response must be to reject the premise. You have to ask, what about C, D, and E? Why are we only looking at these 2 paths? You have to violently widen the frame that they're trying to narrow.
Reject the premise. Okay, stepping outside the frame protects our logic. Let's move to the next layer of the shield, which is protecting our emotional vulnerabilities from deep illusions. We're looking at a combination of Law 32, play to people's fantasies, and Law 27, play on people's need to believe to create a cult-like following.
This is where manipulation enters its darkest and most destructive territory. The historical anchor for playing to fantasies takes us to the Spanish conquistadors in the 1500s. Men like Hernan Cortés led small, ragged armies of poor, desperate, starving men across a terrifying ocean into brutally hostile, unknown territory.
How did he keep these men marching day after day when they were dying of disease and facing overwhelming odds?
He didn't promise them a hard life of incremental labor. He didn't promise them a realistic pension plan. He fed them an intoxicating fantasy El Dorado, entire cities constructed of solid gold, unlimited, unimaginable wealth that would instantly transform a starving peasant into a king.
He sold them a glittering mirage because the miserable, muddy reality of their situation was just too ugly to bear.
Exactly. And Law 27 scales this concept up into the realm of total devotion, pointing to figures like Charles Manson in the 1960s. It is vital to understand that Manson did not build his cult through physical force. He didn't kidnap people and chain them up.
Right.
He built his following by identifying lost, alienated, deeply vulnerable young people and offering them a vague, romantic illusion of unity and ultimate salvation. He gave them a grand, terrifying narrative where they were the chosen few, the enlightened survivors of an upcoming apocalyptic race war.
It is the complete weaponization of the human need for hope and belonging.
That is the core mechanism. The text warns us that human beings at a fundamental biological level are wired to reject the ugly, boring truth. The truth is that success requires agonizingly slow, incremental hard work. The truth is that relationships are difficult and require constant compromise.
Yeah, and we hate that truth.
We hate it. We crave magic. We crave the shortcut. And manipulators study this craving. The expert analysis in the source material points out 4 specific, recurring fantasies that manipulators will dangle in front of you to hook your devotion.
Let's break those down explicitly, because this is an essential red flag checklist for the listener to memorize.
Okay, the first is the fantasy of instant change. This is the late-night infomercial promise. The manipulator promises that one secret formula, one exotic pill, one obscure cryptocurrency investment, or one masterclass will permanently transform your entire life overnight with absolutely no real effort or discipline required on your part.
Yep, see that one everywhere.
The second is the fantasy of escape. This is the illusion that you can simply abandon all of your mundane responsibilities, your debts, and your boring family, and step into a new reality of pure, unadulterated freedom. This is the primary bait used by extreme cults and radical political movements.
Right, leave the corrupt world behind, your family is brainwashed and they don't understand you, come join our perfect enlightened community.
Precisely the pitch. The third is the fantasy of unity. This is the promise of a utopian world entirely free of conflict or disagreement. It sounds deeply appealing, but historically, the fantasy of absolute unity is exclusively utilized by demagogues and dictators to enforce brutal, blind conformity. If you promise unity, you eventually have to eradicate anyone who disagrees.
Wow, that's a chilling way to look at it.
And the fourth is the fantasy of reversing the unchangeable. This is the manipulator who promises the impossible. They promise a magical diet that reverses aging. They promise to cheat death. Or in the political sphere, they promise to reverse the flow of time and bring back some mythological good old days that never actually existed.
Nostalgia weaponized as a drug. So the defense mechanism here is really tuning your internal alarm bell to recognize the pitch. When someone is offering you a magical shortcut that bypasses hard work, when they claim to possess a secret knowledge that the elites don't want you to know, or when they try to isolate you by creating a stark us versus the corrupt world dynamic where they are your only savior, the alarm bells need to be deafening.
Absolutely deafening.
You have to actively, consciously choose the boring, difficult truth over the glittering, intoxicating fantasy.
That is the discipline. You must anchor your mind to reality no matter how unromantic or painful it feels in the moment.
Which transitions us perfectly into Law 10, infection. Avoid the unhappy and unlucky, because sometimes the immediate threat to your life isn't a grand cult leader or a Machiavellian CEO. Sometimes the threat is just the deeply miserable person sitting at the desk right next to you.
We're talking about the emotional vampire.
Yes, and the historical anchor here is a fascinating figure from the 19th century, Lola Montez.
Right. Lola Montez was a fiercely charismatic, incredibly beautiful Irish courtesan who basically reinvented herself as a Spanish dancer. She had a terrifying, well-documented track record of enchanting, incredibly powerful men and then utterly, systematically destroying their lives.
Who was her most famous victim?
King Ludwig of Bavaria. He was a seasoned monarch, but he became completely bewitched by her. He gave her immense wealth, a title of nobility, and even allowed her to dictate state policy. But wherever Lola Montez went, absolute, uncontrollable chaos followed.
What kind of chaos?
She was arrogant, she insulted the public, she picked fights with the military, her chaotic actions sparked massive violent protests in the streets, Bavaria spiraled into a severe political crisis, and eventually the people in the government turned entirely on the king. He was forced to abdicate his throne, losing his kingdom and his legacy.
Wow.
He later admitted in his writings that during his time with her, he was acting like a man possessed by a disease.
And that is the core terrifying concept of this law. Emotions are not contained. They are contagious. It is an infection. But I feel like we need to be very careful with the definition here. We are not talking about abandoning a friend who just had a run of bad luck or someone going through a genuine tragedy like a divorce or an illness. We're talking about chronic, systemic instigators.
That distinction is absolutely crucial. We're not saying abandon people in need. We're talking about people who live perpetually in crisis mode. People whose every romantic relationship ends in an explosive, dramatic catastrophe. People who are constantly feuding with their coworkers, who are always playing the victim, and who possess a terrifying psychological ability to ensure that the chaos surrounding them is never, ever their fault.
They are black holes for your energy. You try to be a good person. You listen to them complain. You try to help them. You try to systematically fix their problems. And instead of them getting better, you just start drowning in the water with them. Your own life starts falling apart.
Because their chaos inevitably becomes your chaos. You cannot fix them because they draw their identity and their energy from the drama. The source material is remarkably blunt about the required defense strategy here.
What does it say to do?
The ultimate defense against an emotional vampire is not a clever psychological trick. It is not a boundary-setting conversation. It is physical and emotional quarantine. You do not argue with them. You do not try to save them. You do not try to use logic to talk them out of their self-sabotage.
You just run.
You simply run. You cut contact completely because you cannot cure them. You can only catch their disease.
Cut the cord to save the ship. Okay. We have reached the deepest, perhaps most uncomfortable layer of the shield. Law 33. Discover each man's thumbscrew. The foundational premise of this law is that everyone, no matter how powerful, how wealthy, or how put together they project themselves to be, has a hidden, crippling weakness.
A thumbscrew. A specific psychological vulnerability that, if pressed by an enemy, causes them to instantly lose control and act irrationally. J. Edgar Hoover is the perfect, terrifying historical embodiment of this law.
Oh, man.
Hoover was the director of the FBI, but he controlled the political landscape of Washington, D.C. for decades, not through his official legal law enforcement duties, but through his secret files.
The notorious, legendary Hoover files.
Exactly. He utilized massive government resources to keep exhaustive, highly classified records on the hidden vices, the extramarital affairs, the childhood traumas, the past financial mistakes, and the secret, desperate insecurities of politicians, celebrities, civil rights leaders, and even sitting U.S. presidents.
That's insane.
And he didn't always need to explicitly blackmail them or use the files openly. Just the quiet, implicit knowledge that Hoover knew exactly where your thumbscrew was located was enough to keep the most powerful men in the free world completely paralyzed and entirely compliant to his political wishes.
Okay, so I want to ask a very vulnerable question here, synthesizing this for the listener.
Sure.
If the underlying premise is true, if every single human being has a thumbscrew, like a deep childhood wound, a hidden insecurity, a desperate need for external validation, or a secret fear, how do we possibly protect ours? Because if a manipulator's primary goal is to probe our defenses, find that hidden button, and press it, how do we stop them from finding it?
It's the most important question. To protect it, you first have to understand the methodology a manipulator uses to hunt for it. The text breaks down exactly how they look for the cracks in your armor. First, they look for extreme contradictions.
Like what?
If someone walks into an office projecting extreme, hyper-aggressive machismo and constantly talks about how tough they are, a skilled manipulator instantly knows that person is likely hiding a deep, fragile, crippling insecurity about their own weakness. The overcompensation is the map to the thumbscrew.
Oh, I see.
Second, they look for the helpless child. An adult who lacked paternal approval or affection in childhood will often, unconsciously, blindly follow anyone in the workplace who assumes a paternal, authoritative role and offers them validation.
Right.
And third, they look for deep emotional voids. They look for people who are desperately unhappy in their marriages or deeply bored with their careers, and they strategically fill that void to create dependency.
So they are quietly observing our overcompensations and our unfulfilled needs.
Yes. Therefore, Your ultimate impenetrable defense against this is hyper-awareness of your own psychology.
Huh?
You must do the hard, solitary, deeply uncomfortable work of identifying your own overcompensations. You have to interrogate yourself.
Oh.
Are you overly reliant on praise from your superiors? Are you utterly terrified of confrontation to the point that you will agree to terrible deals? Do you have uncontrollable volatile emotions when it comes to lust or greed or vanity?
Because manipulators do not use logic to control you. They use those raw, unexamined emotions to short-circuit your logic.
Exactly.
If you master your own internal emotional landscape, no one else can pull your strings. If you know through intense self-reflection that you have a desperate, lingering childhood need to be liked and praised, and you acknowledge that weakness, then when a new coworker suddenly starts showering you with extreme unearned flattery, you don't just melt into a puddle of gratitude.
Right?
Your self-awareness acts as a firewall. Your brain stops and says, wait, this person is forcefully pressing my validation button. Why? You take away their element of surprise by knowing your own terrain better than they do.
That is the profound realization. Self-awareness is the heavy armor that covers the thumbscrew. A manipulator cannot exploit a weakness that you have already identified and secured.
This is an incredible defensive architecture. We've built the shield. We know how to spot the Trojan horses of false generosity. We know how to break out of the illusion of forced choices. We know how to reject the seduction of fantasies. We know to run from emotional vampires. And we know how to guard our deepest insecurities.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. And honestly, playing defense 24/7 is exhausting. It is a reactive state of living. Which brings us to our final act today, Phase 4, the ultimate defense, fluidity and action. We have learned to spot the traps, but how do we structurally move through the world so we can never be caught in one in the first place?
The answer lies in the very final, culminating law of the entire book, Law 48. Assume formlessness. And the philosophy here transcends office politics. It moves deeply into the realm of martial arts, existential strategy, and Taoist philosophy. The modern anchor for this concept is the legendary martial artist Bruce Lee.
The famous quote, "Be water, my friend."
Exactly. Bruce Lee revolutionized martial arts by aggressively discarding the rigid, classical, hundreds of years old stances and formalized katas. He argued that if you lock yourself into a specific immovable form or a highly predictable pattern of fighting, you give your opponent a stationary target. You become a known quantity, and known quantities can be analyzed and destroyed.
But water.
Water, however, has absolutely no shape. It adapts instantaneously to whatever container it is poured into. It can flow gently around an obstacle, or it can crash with devastating, unstoppable force.
The book contrasts this fluidity with a brilliant corporate example, looking at the history of IBM.
Yes, looking at IBM in the mid to late 20th century. For decades, they absolutely dominated the global computing industry. They were untouchable. But they became rigidly, obsessively attached to their form. The giant, room-sized mainframe computer. They built massive, slow-moving corporate bureaucracies, inflexible sales strategies, and their entire identity around that one specific form.
Right.
When the agile, highly adaptable personal computer revolution emerged, driven by upstarts like Apple and Microsoft, IBM flatly refused to adapt. The rigidity made them slow, arrogant, and predictable. And they almost lost their entire empire because they simply could not change their shape to meet the new reality of the market.
We hold on to routines, we hold on to rigid corporate rules, and we hold on to our established personalities because they give us the comforting illusion of control. We think, if I always act exactly this way, if I always follow this specific script, I am safe. But the text is arguing the exact terrifying opposite. Your rigidity is what makes you a target.
It does. A formless opponent is psychologically and physically exhausting to fight. Think about a workplace conflict. If an enemy attacks you with a subtle insult or an aggressive political maneuver in a meeting, and you react with predictable, rigid anger, you are giving them exactly what they wanted. You gave them a target to hit, and you proved their leverage over you.
Yeah.
But if you take absolutely nothing personally, if you remain emotionally unreadable fluid and let the attack slide off you like vapor, they exhaust themselves swinging wildly at shadows. The ultimate unbreachable defense against all power plays is to simply not present a fist emotional target.
Okay, I love the philosophy of formlessness, but I have to point out what feels like a massive, glaring contradiction in the source material. We are talking about being fluid, being like water, being formless, always adapting, taking the shape of the container. But much earlier in the text, the book lays out Law 28, enter action with boldness. And the historical example given for boldness is Hernan Cortés.
Ah, yes. Landing his massive expedition in Mexico and immediately burning his own ships.
Right. Cortés lands his men in intensely hostile, unknown territory. And to ensure that his men do not even entertain the thought of retreating when the fighting gets brutal, he orders his own fleet of ships to be set on fire and sunk. It is the absolute ultimate no retreat, victory, or death commitment.
Yeah.
But wait, we just spent 10 minutes saying we need to be formless, adaptable, always have an escape route, and be like vapor. But now the text is saying, burn the ships, cut off your escape, and go all in with absolute, terrifying, rigid commitment. How do those two entirely opposing ideas exist within the exact same strategic framework?
It is a brilliant observation, and resolving that apparent contradiction is the absolute crux of advanced strategic thinking. It seems contradictory on the surface, but they are actually two halves of a complete, devastatingly effective mechanism. Here is how they synthesize beautifully. Formlessness is about your strategy and your mindset. It is how you analyze the board before you make a move. It is how you adapt to new, chaotic information and how you refuse to be emotionally triggered by your opponent. You stay completely fluid and adaptable in your planning phase. You consider every angle.
Okay, so the mind is water.
But boldness is about your execution. When you are in the planning phase, analyzing the data, you are water. But once you finally make the decision to move, once you commit to a specific path of action, you must instantly freeze into solid ice. You must execute that decision with unshakable, audacious, terrifying confidence.
Because hesitation is the great killer of strategy.
Yes. If you execute a brilliant, fluid strategy with timid, half-hearted, anxious action, you infect the entire endeavor with the stench of doubt. Timidity invites predators. It signals weakness. Boldness is sudden, swift, totally committed action where you burn your psychological ships, shocks your opponents. It paralyzes them and forces them entirely onto the defensive, reacting to your reality.
So you remain totally, unreadably adaptable right up until the exact microsecond of action, and then you strike with total, undeniable conviction. Be formless in the mind, be bold in the hand. That synthesis makes perfect sense. It removes the contradiction entirely.
It is the ultimate psychological and tactical combination for navigating high-stakes environments without being destroyed by them.
Well, we have covered an immense, truly staggering amount of ground today. We have taken an epic historical journey through the deep, often turbulent currents of human behavior. We started with the ascent, learning how to carefully navigate the fragile, dangerous egos of the masters above us, and recognizing the absolute necessity of capturing and controlling attention in a crowded world.
We examined the stronghold, unpacking the deeply counterintuitive need to keep trusted friends at a professional distance while structurally managing your enemies. We explored the immense, quiet power of utilizing scarcity both of your words and your physical presence to consolidate your authority and force others to reveal their hands.
And most importantly, we spent massive amounts of time building the shield. We learned to protect our own minds and our careers from the Trojan horses of false, sudden generosity. We learned how to step outside the restrictive frames of forced illusions of choice. We outlined the 4 glittering fantasies that manipulators use to seduce us, and we learned why we must absolutely run, not walk, away from the draining presence of emotional vampires.
And we concluded with the ultimate martial philosophy of power, mastering the synthesis of remaining perfectly fluid in our strategies and our emotional reactions, while remaining devastatingly bold in our execution.
I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a moment as we close. We touched on this at the very beginning, but it bears repeating with much more weight now that you have heard the reality of these historical and psychological dynamics. Understanding these laws, studying this somewhat dark, shadowy architecture of human psychology, it does not make you a villain. Power is a fundamental, inescapable reality of human dynamics. It is happening in your office boardroom, it is happening in your family dynamics, it is happening in your community politics right now, whether you acknowledge it or not.
It's always happening.
By taking the time to learn this language, you aren't choosing to become a ruthless manipulator. You are simply choosing not to be blind anymore. You are now equipped with the X-ray vision we talked about at the start of the hour. You can walk into a room, spot the hidden currents of influence, recognize exactly when someone is subtly trying to press your emotional thumbscrew, and consciously, safely chart your own course through the maze.
It is ultimately about moving from being an unconscious pawn on the board, reacting to everyone else's moves, to being a player who understands the rules of the game. But I want to leave you with a final, somewhat provocative thought to mull over in your own time, building on that idea of formlessness and protecting your deepest weaknesses.
Let's hear it.
The entirety of the book focuses heavily on outward dynamics, how to maneuver around other people, how to defend against their attacks, how to leverage their desires. But if our greatest, most fatal vulnerability is always our own predictable desires, our own vanity, our own greed, and our own unexamined fears, then what if the ultimate highest form of power isn't about controlling other people at all? What if true power, the kind that makes you truly, historically untouchable, is achieving such complete, rigorous, unshakable mastery over yourself that no one else's power dynamics even apply to you anymore?
That is a phenomenal paradigm-shifting question to leave off on. If you are not driven by fear, if you are not blinded by ego, and if you are not seduced by fantasies, the manipulator has absolutely no levers left to pull. The X-ray shows nothing but a solid, unbreakable core. We hope this deep dive has given you a profound new lens through which to view the world, a new way to read the room, and most importantly, a robust new shield to protect your own peace and your own agency. Keep questioning the invisible forces around you, stay curious, and we will see you next time.